Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist congregation of Terre, Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams. But we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other.
And right now we are going to reflect on being you. The sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. The sixth principle seems extravagant in its hopefulness and improbable in its prospects. Can we continue to say we want world community, peace, liberty, and justice for all? The world is full of genocide, abuse, terror, and war. What have we gotten ourselves into? As naive or impossible as the sixth principle may seem, I'm not willing to give up on it. In the face of our culture's apathy and fear, I want to imagine and help create a powerful vision of peace by peaceful means, liberty by liberatory means, justice by just means. I want us to believe and to live as if we believe that a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all is possible. There is no guarantee that we will succeed, but I can assure you that we will improve ourselves and improve the world by trying. That's by Reverend Sean Parker Dennison, Tree of Life Congregation in McHenry, Illinois. And next are our opening words. They're number 418. Come into the circle of love and justice. Come into the community of mercy, holiness, and health. Come, and you shall know peace and joy. Our opening hymn is Joy to the World, 245. Our transitional words today are number 577, and they are responsive. You will read the italics. It is possible to live in peace. If someone with courage and vision can rise to lead in nonviolent action, the winter of despair can, in the twinkling of an eye, be turned into the summer of hope.
It is possible to live in peace.
Nonviolence is not a garment to put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart, and it must be an inseparable part of our being.
It is possible to live in peace.
Nonviolence, which is a quality of the heart, cannot come by an appeal to the brain. It is a plant of slow growth, growing imperceptibly but surely.
It is possible to live in peace.
If a single person achieves the highest kind of love, it will be sufficient to neutralize the hate of millions.
It is possible to live in peace.
If we are to reach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children.
It is possible to live in peace.
The future depends on what we do in the present.
It is possible to live in peace.
Mohandas Gandhi. Today, our message will be given by Frank Young. He is joining us through recording.
My topic today is nonviolence, past and future. The 1940s and 50s were tumultuous times. My first few years in school were at a public school that was segregated because New Jersey still permitted this at that time. But in 1948, the school board reluctantly recognized that the recently passed state constitution did prohibit segregation in public schools. So, by 1954, when the Supreme Court finally determined that segregated schools were unconstitutional, the public schools in my town had been integrated for 6 years. I first heard of nonviolence when I was a junior high school student. I had joined the local Quaker meeting as a teenager and had heard quite a bit about Quaker testimonies regarding war and participating in war. Dinner table conversations in my family included discussion about the problems that minority students were experiencing, not just in segregated schools in the South, but in the integrated public schools of Princeton, New Jersey. When the Montgomery bus boycott started in 1955, there was general support around our dinner table. During the next few years, I gradually became aware of things that should never happen in a fair and equitable society. One striking example: we became friendly with a large family that had moved north from the Koinonia Farm community in Americus, Georgia. This integrated Christian community was boycotted and threatened by white supremacists. The family had moved north to escape the tracer bullets being fired across the farm property. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, I was attending college. My attention focused on war and nonviolent demonstrations objecting to war, war preparations, and the suppression of anti-war ideas. I was involved in some demonstrations supporting the voyage of the Golden Rule. This ship was illegally prevented from sailing to the areas of the Pacific where atom bombs were being tested. At this time, I also filed a request for conscientious objector status with my draft board. Their response was to classify me 1A every summer when I was not in school, in direct violation of the Selective Service regulations in effect at that time. But in all honesty, my main activities during the early 1960s were graduate school and supporting my family. But there were also many Quaker activities and connections. Shortly after we got married, we were fortunate to get to know George Lakey, a Quaker and a very active educator, organizer, and practitioner of nonviolence. That relationship has continued to this day. There'll be more about George later. When Philadelphia staged a civil defense drill that required everyone to take cover, I cooperated in creating a demonstration that poked fun at that drill. We all brought our own bomb shelters so that we could take cover during the drill. Our shelters were our umbrellas. The demonstration enabled us to point out the absurdity of the whole bomb shelter concept. We got some nice press. We wanted to educate people about the futility of depending on bomb shelters. The obvious ineffectiveness of our shelters allowed us to point out the similar ineffectiveness of everything that was called a bomb shelter by the government. For some reason, Philadelphia soon stopped having that kind of civil defense drill. I guess that ridiculing the lies being disseminated by the government was enough to cause a change in this ridiculous and ineffective practice. Humor always makes nonviolent action a bit more effective. Racial problems became more important to us as the situation in the South became more dire and explicit. As we were now married and shortly had 2 infant sons, there were limitations on our ability to participate. But we helped with some of the training of people who were going to demonstrate in Washington. And we learned about some of the problems and needs of people who were living in essentially segregated communities, whether in Philadelphia, where we lived, in Mississippi, where we spent the summer of 1966 teaching at Tougaloo College, or in Washington, D.C., where our newest family member lived when she was not with us, attending high school at Friends Select School. My personal library had increased significantly during these years. Besides the necessary books for my mathematics courses, I have been collecting books about nonviolence and racial issues in this country. Many of the Quakers that we met with every Sunday were social workers, community organizers, or employees of the American Friends Service Committee. We learned much from them. Discussions about social change always seemed to be intermixed with discussions about nonviolence. By the end of the 1960s, we had 4 children, and I had completed my degree. A new job awaited us at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. The Knox students were interested in nonviolence, and I was asked by some of them to teach a course in nonviolent social change. 55 students initially enrolled, but more than 20 quickly dropped the course when they found out that the required reading was usually 1 whole book each week. The course was an interesting one to teach. I did not have the usual academic background in the subject, but I received help from my Philadelphia contacts and from my colleagues at Knox. One of my students eventually completed a self-designed major in social change and later obtained a related advanced degree at Carnegie Mellon University. Different views about nonviolence were an important part of the course. The father of one student was serving as the leader of a national organization of chiefs of police, and we arranged for him to be a guest speaker. And I was able to get George Lakey to visit the campus and give a talk on nonviolence. I taught this course twice more and enjoyed doing so. The students were pleased with the course, and those who have kept in contact with me have indicated that it impacted their professional and social lives. I was able to use excellent textbooks written by a variety of authors, including both scholars of nonviolence and practitioners of nonviolence. This combination of resources helped the students understand the many successes of nonviolent campaigns, as well as the way that nonviolence leads to lasting resolution of conflicts. The final paper for the course was always in 2 parts. The first part was an exposition of some nonviolent action or campaign. This was a study of the historical facts of the case. The second part was a discussion of the successes and failures of the campaign. Students had to describe the tactics used in the campaign and explain how and why those tactics contributed to the successes or failures of the campaign. I shared these papers with social science faculty members because I wanted to see if my grading was appropriate and was pleasantly surprised at their comments. They indicated that my course was academically acceptable despite my lack of appropriate academic background. The last 2 times I taught the course, it had junior level status and was allowed as a major elective in several majors. We continued demonstrating, of course. When President Nixon authorized an invasion of Cambodian territory, there was a protest parade on the main street of Galesburg. One of my colleagues was a rather strict professor of German descent. His father had been the pastor of a German-speaking church in Iowa. When my colleague was a youth during World War I, some residents of the town chose to throw rocks and garbage at his family home. This led to my colleague's firm belief that protests and demonstrations were always unwelcome and usually cruel. Because of the clearly nonviolent nature of our demonstration, my colleague was willing to participate. It was the first time he had participated in a protest of any kind. The lesson that I learned from this was that nonviolence done well can be a valuable support for participatory democracy. What about nonviolence today? Is it passé? Are the civil rights campaigns that liberals speak of so fondly only rare examples of the successful use of nonviolence? When I was younger, the people who were talking about civil resistance were pacifists and theologians. They were talking about the right or moral way to institute change. They were clearly not representative of mainstream thought. Today, there are significant numbers of academics analyzing the power of the people, They are analyzing limits to the power of established systems. They are providing evidence that all political systems, even totalitarian ones, rely on the consent of the citizens and will fail without continued substantial consent. Civil resistance is not the same as warfare. Indeed, it is an effective way to convince ordinary citizens that they have real power, that there are limits to the powers of the system. It also demonstrates to tyrants the limited effectiveness of violent oppression. The best way to do all of this is to educate the general population about the effectiveness of non-cooperation and other nonviolent techniques. Today, we have numerous scholarly works that analyze nonviolent campaigns and nonviolent strategies. The authors of these articles and books are studying what causes political institutions to break down. Their professional contributions are respected and studied by traditional academics. The study of nonviolence has become a part of many political science, sociology, and history programs. The predominant opinion of the scholars in this field is that the available evidence demonstrates clearly that nonviolence is quite effective and that citizens have much more power than is generally believed. Contemporary studies of nonviolence do not limit nonviolence to protests and demonstrations. All forms of civil resistance are considered, with the obvious exception of armed insurrection, explosives, machine guns, snipers, and the like. Strikes, slowdowns, and refusal to cooperate with injustice are all effective nonviolent tactics. Predominant popular opinion still maintains that the citizenry has no power against the military power of established authorities. But historical evidence shows that this is a serious error. There are now extensive analyses of civil resistance movements in many countries. These include academic analyses of which techniques are more likely to lead to the movement prevailing, and people who are philosophically committed to nonviolence can now point to academic studies that indicate how nonviolent tactics can put a campaign at a strategic advantage. Indeed, one scholar, Erica Chenoweth, a professor in the Harvard Kennedy School, has a current study that demonstrates that nearly 2/3 of historical civil resistance campaigns were successful in producing major changes in the communities where they were used. And the evidence also shows that these instances of civil resistance were less expansive, caused less economic instability, caused fewer deaths, resulted in less widespread disruption, and produced more lasting change. Furthermore, the history of such civil resistance is extensive, extending from strikes of workers building tombs for Egyptian rulers in 1170 before the Christian era to the present. Many people argue against nonviolence by pointing out that those in power will engage in violence against nonviolent demonstrators. This is only part of the truth. When those in power engage in violence against people who are merely protesting, there will be an immediate increase in the number of people who are willing to protest. The power of those holding power depends on the many individuals whose activities support the existing system. When a significant number of these supporters become aware of their power and stop supporting the existing system, then that system will either fail or there will be some changes made. As Frederick Douglass said, the limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. No political system can last when citizens remove the necessary cooperation and support that the system requires. Good nonviolent campaigns succeed by convincing people that the present system is not acceptable. Campaigns that are too focused, like warfare is focused, will often fail because the few leaders who oppose the system become obvious targets and victims. But when leadership and tactics are widely distributed and diverse, when tactics focus on changing the attitudes of the oppressed and not just the oppressors, when there are multiple demonstrations of the real dangers and consequences of the present system, then there will be significant pressure for change, pressure that is unable to be ignored. In short, nonviolence done right has the strategic advantage. Armed insurrections do not. Now back again to George Lakey. George is still doing community organization and is involved with several groups that are facilitating nonviolent social change. He is taught at Swarthmore College, Haverford College, the University of Pennsylvania, as well as Quaker study centers in England, Woodbrook, and Pennsylvania, Pendle Hill. At Swarthmore, he taught a course titled Nonviolent Responses to Terrorism. The course studied nonviolent techniques that had been used to defend countries against terrorism. For example, one can reduce the recruitment of and the number of terrorists by creating economic growth and jobs in those areas of the country where most terrorists are liable to be recruited. Reducing the number of terrorists will reduce their power and reduce the threat of terrorism. In contrast, there is ample evidence that violent attempts to destroy terrorism by killing terrorists have an unfortunate side effect. They increase the number of people willing to engage in terrorism. The final assignment in Leakey's course was to choose a country currently threatened by terrorism, get to know that country's strengths and weaknesses, and then develop a realistic defense strategy against terrorism that would be nonviolent and feasible given the nature of the country. Of course, the students were required to support their choice of strategies. Some Pentagon professionals involved with defense against terrorism heard about this course, and George was asked to meet with some anti-terrorism experts in the Pentagon. He did so and asked the experts about the possibility of the Pentagon exploring the use of the various nonviolent techniques studied in his course, in the hope that the government could develop ways to combine the various techniques and develop synergies from such combinations. George learned two things from that meeting. First, he learned that the experts in the Pentagon had no problems with anything he said about nonviolent methods. There was absolutely no disagreement regarding the effectiveness of each item on his list of techniques. Second, he learned that the Pentagon and the U.S. government were not able to do anything like what he suggested. The government decision-making process produces simple solutions, not complex and flexible ones. The process to get strategies approved results in only one strategy being selected. Flexibility is removed as proposals are reviewed by multiple parts of the government. Government decision-making methods effectively eliminate any possibility of using a flexible collection of nonviolent approaches to defending against terrorism, even if they are individually cheaper and more effective, and even if, when a flexible collection of methods is used, there are synergies that make the combination even more effective than individual methods. Does any of this have immediate reference to Unitarian Universalists? Our first principle calls for support and affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The second principle calls for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The sixth principle affirms the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. The seventh principle urges respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. It seems to me that attention to these principles requires us to pay careful attention to nonviolent social change. We need to educate ourselves about the ways that nonviolence can help us support and implement these principles. We need to be free to cast aside generally accepted violent actions that do not affirm the dignity of every person, that have been demonstrated to be unjust, not equitable, and not compassionate, that have not succeeded in creating lasting peace, liberty, and justice for all, and that are not famous for supporting respect for the web of all existence. Surely respect for the UU principles requires thinking and acting outside the box of the past, rejecting traditional assumptions that are not based on historical evidence. The UU principles challenge us to work to create a better world. History teaches us that using techniques of nonviolence is not just a better way to accomplish our goals. It, like the democratic process, is more likely to ensure long-term stability in a society that does fulfill the goals of the UU principles. Thank you.
Our closing hymn today is number 225, O Come, O Come, Emmanuel.
To the aching heart be cheer.
Our closing words are 680. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of, and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, and to bow to the mystery. Barbara Peskin.